Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Thursday, September 9th, 2025. The time is 6:35 p.m. We'll do roll call first. Susan Axelrod? Here. Joe Murphy?
Here.
Robin Pothier? Here. Liz Karp is absent. Caper Wilson? Here. And Maria Mack is here. Our first agenda item is a subdivision and land development project, South Kingstown Housing Authority, Champaign Heights redevelopment. Jamie, do you want to start us off?
I'll just brief overview, Madam Chair. Again, you have an application, not necessarily an application before you, but I'll kind of set the table, and you do have representatives from the South Kingstown Housing Authority here. You have previously approved a development plan for the South Kingstown Housing Authority at Champaign Heights. They were seeking funding over the last year. They did not receive a favorable response as it relates to funding from the state of Rhode Island. They were asked to look at their design and look at ways to potentially reduce the number of buildings in order to reduce the cost associated with the project. The Housing Authority and their design team went through a number of reiterations of the changes, came up with what they thought was a final plan that they believed they could bring forward and share with the town. There's a provision within our regulations and state law that allows the administrative officer to make a determination that there's been a minor change to a previously approved plan, and that the administrative officer can, in essence, review and approve that change so long as they make the determination it's minor. In this scenario, I wasn't 100% comfortable as your administrative officer signing off on a major change which changes the building typology as well as the building count and the orientation of the buildings on the plan. So there's a provision on the regulatory side that allows me to seek guidance from the planning board to assist or support a determination that the changes are minor. Chris Little tonight, representing the Housing Authority, and his team will put forward reasons why they feel the changes are minor, in the hope that the planning board will come to the conclusion that the minors are in fact minor in nature, and that you would be comfortable if the administrative officer approved their changes as minor changes to a previously approved plan. So again, I'm looking for guidance from you as the administrative officer on the subject matter of minor versus non-minor changes. If they're determined to not be minor changes, then it requires a full application to the planning board as a change to a previously approved project as a major revision. So.
Thank you, Jamie. Who would like to step up to represent the project?
Hello, Chair Mack, members of the board. Good to see you again tonight. James Callahan of Callahan & Callahan, 30 Brown Street in Wickford. As Jamie very well explained, we're here tonight to revisit the comprehensive permit preliminary plan approved for 364 Curtis Corner Road, known as Champaign Heights. As you know, the preliminary plan for Champaign Heights was approved on January 28th, 2025, when you approved 85 new LMI units for that site. And before I start tonight's presentation, I just want to say thank you to the board for that effort last winter. We acknowledge, understand, and appreciate that the board and the staff made extraordinary efforts to move the Champaign Heights proposal forward with great speed last winter, and that cannot be understated. We had no choice but to move fast or quickly based on the application process around housing, and we thank you for that help. But now we're back here, honestly, quite unexpectedly. At no point last winter did we anticipate we would have to return to this arena for this proposal, the preliminary plan, as part of the development process. But as unexpected as it is, to move this matter forward with Rhode Island Housing, we have to come to you tonight with a request. And the request is to reduce the number of buildings approved from 34 to 23. And that is it. That's as simple and straightforward as I can make it. Nothing else in the project will change except for a few technicalities. Not the units, not the LMI count, not the architecture style, not the landscaping except to move a few things around, and not the bedroom count. So we're simply proposing to combine a few of the buildings. And I think it's fair, and we're here tonight, to inform you of why we need to do that and what we propose to do. If you grant this recommendation tonight, which is, as Jamie said, we're looking for a consensus almost from your board that this is a minor change and that Director Rabbit can approve it administratively once he receives all the plans he requires from us in full detail. To that end, tonight we are going to make a full proposal to you on the changes. We have Paul Adaman from Union, Molly Titus from Dupree, Jen Judge from Gravelly Hill Design, and Chris Little from South Kingston Housing, all here tonight, as well as, I think, everyone in the crowd except for maybe one person. So, why we're here. After the approvals you gave us in January, the plan was forwarded to Rhode Island Housing as part of the application process for funding. And an approved plan is a key threshold to achieve a high or the highest score you need for the funding process. And through your efforts, we did get that. However, the plan approved was deemed to be too expensive for the funding we requested. And to reduce those costs, and the costs were tied to construction, operation, and maintenance going forward. To reduce those costs, the proposal they sent back was to reduce the building quantity. And basically, I don't want to put it too bluntly, but we basically have no choice but to proceed in that path. There are no other funding sources for comprehensive permit proposals of this size and scale anywhere. It doesn't exist, at least in Rhode Island or nationally. And considering the climate that we're in now politically, that funding is essential right now, today, for this. And to achieve that directive, we've reduced the number of buildings, but we've also tried to maintain the spirit and intent of the prior approvals. We will still provide 85 new units, as well as new laundry facilities. The design will remain architecturally the same. The landscaping will retain the feel of the original proposal. And 100% of the units will remain LMI, as is the whole point of this process and this development. As I stated before, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it can't be stated enough. This proposal, whether the current proposal or the prior proposal, will provide the residents of Champaign Heights with an exponentially increased quality of life. The improvements in the buildings, the landscaping, the walkability, and the amenities can almost not be quantified. It is literally going to be a life-changing event for the residents of Champaign Heights. Not only the ones who are there today, but for, I think, 32 or 33 other families or residents that be able to move into that site based on the new construction on the open field in the rear. Overall, we feel that, this is hypothetical, if presented to you originally, I think personally that that proposal would have been approved. This modification requires no variances, no special relief, and no waivers. It's basically the same proposal except that the quantity of buildings has been lessened or simplified. In effect, we think this is right along the lines of what was proposed in the past. And we believe it qualifies as a minor modification based on both the subdivision regulations and the applicable state law, which I can get into in more detail if required. We're just asking tonight that you listen to our proposal, consider the recommendation, and give Director Rabbit the ability to approve these plans administratively so we can apply for the next round of funding, which is in the very near future in the next 3 months. So with that, I'd ask Paul Adaman from Union to come up and give you the full-scale design change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Glad to be here again before you, in a way.
Could you just state your name for the
Paul
record?
Ataman,
Thank you.
Principal at Union Studio Architecture and Community Design. I think you've heard a very good overview of the proposed changes and the reason we're here before you tonight. So I'd like to walk you through some of the salient features or changes of the proposed revised plan, and also just sort of highlight the areas and things that have not changed. I'll skip back. I'll start with looking back at the preliminary plan approval, the site plan, which Mr. Callahan said already that there's 34 buildings proposed back then, 85 dwelling units, as well as 128 parking spaces. And this road network was laid out for neighborhood feel and fabric, where front porches and sidewalk network create walkability, enhance the streetscape, and provides plenty of public space throughout the neighborhood. That was something that we worked hard on with you to create those public spaces and landscaping. And also keeping in mind that we need to, I'm not sure why this is having this feedback, but then also with the constraints of the site grading and stormwater drainage. So the revised plan that we're talking about today has the same road and sidewalk layout. It has the same amount of linear feet of roadway. Nothing's changed on the layout. The buildings are generally located in the same locations as before, with no setbacks as was previously mentioned, and they're in relationship to the property lines and distances from the road remains the same. We have the same number of common green spaces, pocket parks, and passive recreation areas. We have the same number of parking spaces, units, and bedrooms. The unit mix, meaning 1, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, and 5 bedrooms remain the same. The grading will also remain consistent with the original plan, and it'll provide a lot more smoother transitions between the buildings because we have a little bit more space between the proposed buildings. And this revised site plan does not add any complications or complexity to the site engineering relative to grading, stormwater management, and utilities. And it does not alter the original intent and thoughtfulness that we've designed the neighborhood with. The front porches and doors are to the street with rear entry to private patios. I should point out that all the buildings, as you recall, are townhouse style units. So every unit has their own front door and own rear door. That remains the same. And then we've also maintained the street grid. So now looking at what we are proposing in the revised site plan. Were in your packet. These are some of the key items that have been modified or been added to the project. And I'm going to just slide this over for a moment. Some of this is, I'm sorry, will be redundant because I have other bullet points that reflect the same items here. But for instance, the number 1 is, as I mentioned, the same unit mix, bedrooms and apartments. Number 2, we have fewer buildings and fewer building types, meaning we have 6 base unit building types versus 7. We have different landscaping layout, but it is all relative to what we talked about and approved previously with the same number of trees, if not more, and coordinated with the stormwater drainage and grading. We have some larger outdoor common spaces, and that is evidenced right by the administration building, bullet point number 4 there. as you come into the neighborhood on the left-hand side, that first common space has become a little bit larger. And then as you come into the neighborhood, the next one on the right, the second one on the right-hand side with the number 4 also became a little bit larger. All the other common spaces have stayed the same. I'm having difficulty reading my notes here. The buildings were pulled away from the corner at the first intersection at number 5, creating another additional small pocket park at that corner. And what's nice about that is that both buildings on either side now have wraparound porches to express that and make a little bit of a contribution to that corner pocket park. Number 6, there's greater distances in many of the buildings, creating more opportunity for some landscape and privacy. And then some of the utilities, primarily the dumpster enclosures, are further away from the buildings. That is definitely a plus. And then finally, the smaller and more efficient drainage areas that are scattered throughout. We have not engineered that, but Molly from Dupree Engineering has looked at it and can answer questions to that effect. We feel that it is a plus and an added bonus to have this additional space. So some of the added benefits, other than sort of the numbers, are relative to the site engineering. As I mentioned before, there's slightly reduced roof area compared to the original design, so there's less impervious surface. We have multiple smaller systems rather than a single large one that minimizes risk by limiting the impact should one system fail. So a little bit of redundancy has been built in. Also, the clustering of buildings together creates a larger swath of green space in various locations with no loss of proposed plantings. If anything, there's a bit more. And then we're able to provide space in between the residents and infrastructure I mentioned before. And then the last bullet point, as I mentioned, we are able to increase a couple of the pocket parks and add one more. So this here is a comparison just of what you see in terms of the footprints of the buildings, their orientation to the street, and how they really maintain all the street edges from all the property boundaries from the north, west, south, and east. So we feel like this is a equal plan, if not better, because it maintains the frontages that we set out to establish previously. Unfortunately, I can't point, but if you at the big common green, the first one there that you come to at the first intersection, you can see that the duplexes were merged to one building, but all the front doors are still in their same relationship to that green space, and with the opportunity to have side doors as the front entrances. In terms of the architecture, this is what we propose in the preliminary plan approval. All 2-story townhouse-style apartments with individual doors, front porches and rear patios, and sheds for individual exterior spaces, and then traditional materials for the architecture. The revised maintains those first 3 or 4 bullet points. The same number of units are just rearranged into new building configurations. The 4-unit buildings are well proportioned, thoughtfully designed, and laid out across the site, still create the atmosphere akin to a residential suburban neighborhood. There's also an advantage in terms of maintenance and energy efficiency on the long run. With less exterior walls, each of the apartments become more efficient, especially if they're inboard and flanked by another apartment on the other side or a townhouse. And in the long run, it minimizes the overall operational and maintenance cost. I'll walk through some of the little bit of the variations of details to that, in terms of the base building types, but we are able to introduce some gable roofs to break up the long roof plane on a 4-unit townhouse, utilize wraparound porches in areas to where there's corner conditions that I showed you before, and side entrances can act as the front doors in those instances. What we haven't looked at, and we did not look at a year ago, is differing siding colors and door colors and roof colors. It's a complex and a long process for us to do that, so we haven't taken that time to do it yet. That usually is in the middle of the construction documents, but we assure you that the white palette that we're showing is just to minimize the conversation of people's preferences of color by committee at this early stage. And so this here is sort of an apples to apples comparison of what we originally proposed on the left, which is 7 base building types, and the revised proposal is 6 base building types. But very quickly you can see it's the same materials, same window types, double hung, traditional divided light windows, asphalt shingle roofing, fiberglass columns, shed roofs on the 1-story bump outs for the some of the bedrooms and the larger unit types. So when we look at that and we start looking at specifically the changes from the original buildings to the proposed, you can see how those, what those changes are, or modifications, I should say. For instance, the 4-bedroom was replaced by a 5-bedroom unit based on where it was located on the site. We actually moved the 5-bedroom units closer to the playground areas and separated them out from being within one building. So we thought that that in itself was a big benefit. On the original building type number 2, that changed by just adding a 3-bedroom townhouse to it. It was a little bit of a puzzle of using the exact same units and reassembling them with others for to be suitable for where they are located on the site. In some instances, we didn't have any changes, and we've kept, for instance, the original building number 3 as a 3-unit townhouse. In a couple of instances for the base, the duplexes were combined, so it's just a mirroring of one building on itself to create 4 continuous townhouses. The building number 6 here was, we added one of the 2-bedroom units, and then the original building number 7 did not change. So then all of those were the base unit types, and for some of them that occur a few more times than others on the site, we're looking at a variation of. So for instance, the blue bullet point 2A and 2B have a little bit of a difference of a wraparound porch because it would be addressing a corner condition on the site for another street. Likewise, 3A would have a wraparound porch as well, depending on where it is located on the site. Here, building number type 4 has a variety of variations with double gables at the middle and wraparound porches on either side. The middle being a variation of putting the gables on the ends with a side entrance flanking either end of the building to address a street condition on either side. And this would be facing one of the public greens. And then the last one would be very traditional in terms of all the front doors facing in one direction. 5A and the next one, 6, did not have any changes. And then we assembled these together to see what that would look like in terms of the streetscape, something that we thought we needed to look at to show you today and illustrate to you how this is very compatible with the neighborhood that we've originally laid out and set out to design. So if you have any questions to me or Molly or Jen Judge, as the landscape architect, we'd be glad to entertain them unless somebody else from the team has some closing remarks.
Thank you. Questions from board members?
I have a few questions. I want to thank you because you've done a really nice job of trying to come up with a proposal that is consistent with the prior design, and I think you've done a very nice job at that. But I would like to just focus for a few minutes on the changes. So I understand that it's the same number of units, it's the same number of parking spaces, but the configuration is requiring more units within a building. So there are clearly going to be some differences. For example, you're going to have more interior units that are only going to have possible fenestration to the exterior from the rear and from the front, but not side to side. Could you just, are there changes in interior square footage? What are the changes that that we'll see in the units as a result of the need to change the number of buildings?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think you nailed it. Is the square footages and the plans that you saw before have not changed. It's just them where they are located within a building. And yes, some apartments have lost some exterior windows, but we are strategically making sure that the ends, the front end and the back end, get as much daylight at the front by doing a pair of windows and a door with a big glazing, a 3/4 light to get light in from the front, and then the same strategy from the rear.
So has that resulted in the changing of placement of buildings to maximize light in those areas, or it's?
Yes, we've maximized it as best we can for the goals of consolidating the buildings. I mean, we had looked at a plan that reduced it as far as 15 or 18 buildings, and we felt that that's just going too far and away from the intent of the project, and it would have required rearranging of the roadwork network. So we stopped ourselves and reevaluated that and said, no, we have to tailor it back. Although that would have been the preferred route for Rhode Island Housing and other financiers, but we had to also draw the line to as far as how far we would go. Feel comfortable
Is there
with.
any increase in the fenestration for the interior apartments, or is that the same as before?
Well, it was the same as before because the 3-unit townhouses that we had previously proposed, that middle apartment, the design did not change. So there has not been a reduction in daylight or windows for those units.
So basically, we've simply created more interior apartments rather than, we had interior
Yes.
apartments before, we now have a slightly increased,
Yes.
yeah.
Yep.
And if you could refresh my recollection, my recollection is that there are, at the present time, there are something in the magnitude of 40 or 45 units that are inhabited. Is that correct?
They're currently,
Currently, yeah.
51.
51. And I don't
51.
recall, are these rentals or?
All
owner?
rental.
All rental. And who's the owner?
Well, now you're getting into questions that I should bring Chris up to answer because this might be a different entity who will ultimately own the property. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to answer that question, I'm Chris Little, here on behalf of South Kingstown Housing Authority and also SKHA Services and Development Corporation. So there are currently 40 rented units at Champaign Heights. There are 12 rented units at Fournier Estates that are all family units. All of those 52 units would be located in a reconstructed, redeveloped project at Champaign Heights. Plus there would be 33 additional, what we would be slightly higher income, but still moderate income, 80% AMI units added at Champaign Heights. And the owner of the property right now is South Kingstown Housing Authority, and afterwards the owner of the property will be South Kingstown Housing Authority with a long-term lease to the ownership entity that is the partnership of SKHA Services and Women's Development Corporation, which is necessary in order to secure and process the LIHTC financing.
And the funding authority that's requesting the reduction in units is whom?
Rhode Island Housing and Mortgage Finance Corporation, which is charged legally with making the determination as to who gets the tax credit funding and the ancillary state funding that is available through loans. But without the tax credits are absolutely critical to the ability for these projects to go forward.
And the people who are, the owner, the South County Housing Authority, is responsible for the upkeep of the units so that they have to make sure that they maintain the appropriate standards of habitat.
Excuse me, I'm going to cut in here. I don't mean to cut you off, but
Go right ahead.
and I appreciate Mr. Little's forthright answers and so forth, but you're getting off the topic of what your goal is here tonight, which is basically, is this a substantial change? Is it a minor change or a major change from what was previously approved?
No,
And as long as the answer is there's no change, you really shouldn't be getting into all these other issues.
Okay, that may be, but I'm not sure, I couldn't find a definition of major change or minor change in the regulations.
And it is defined, but it doesn't talk about any of the ownership entities have nothing to do. They could sell it to McDonald's Corp., and if they were doing the same use, it wouldn't change. That the definitions about major and minor refer to the big thing here about number of units and roadway and layout and things like that. That's what minor and major, there is a four-part definition of it already there.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but I didn't have the opportunity to read that myself. The difference on the decision-making process is, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, because as I said, I didn't see the definition in the regulations, but if it is a major change, then the planning board has to approve, and there has to be public notice, which gives an opportunity to hear from both the existing tenants and the neighbors, to hear their assessments of the impacts. So that's my understanding. So I'm trying to appreciate whether we should we're being asked to determine whether this is a minor change so that the administrator can make the decision on their own, or whether this is a major change.
Yes.
And I think that everyone should have an understanding of what the
Right, but you need
implications.
to use the definition and the regulations of what's a minor change and a major change, which I don't have in front of me, but we'll call it up. It's in your regulations and has been since the 1990s.
That's fine. I simply wanted to raise the point, and my colleagues can follow up if they wish.
Okay. And as I said, I think you need to focus on those elements.
But I think they've been very clear. The design that they've come up with is as close to what they had before as they could conceivably have done, given the constraints that they were told from their funding sources. And I think they've done an excellent job about that.
Anyone else? Yes. Susan?
Hi, I think my questions are for you. I like this plan a lot, and I'm almost embarrassed that at the original hearing, nobody ever talked about maybe pulling some of the buildings together to create more green space, because I think that this layout is maybe more appealing. It's bigger buildings, but it's a more appealing, especially with that pocket park on the corner at that intersection. Like, I think we should have, I don't know, maybe you should have noticed that before, because this is, I think, really, really good. And I also want to love the wraparound porches. I think that was a great addition. I think I don't have any comments about this. Oh, I do have one question. So some of the houses seem to have this sort of shed-like wing.
Correct.
Are any of these apartments completely ADA accessible? Like, is that a bedroom scenario where somebody who has mobility challenges could live here?
Yes, there are, I think it was 3 or 4 ADA accessible bedrooms,
Okay.
Units, 5% of the total for Rhode Island housing financing and required. And some of those are, if you look at the one-story, I can go back. Oh, here, this is an example of the 3-unit, the lower one. See that one-story wing? That there's an ADA apartment. However, this little bump out that you're looking at is a larger dwelling unit. So on the left-hand side, those are 2 bedrooms on the ground floor, and then that end unit has 2 bedrooms up above.
Gotcha.
So it's actually one of the larger. It's a 4-bedroom unit, 2 of which are down, which is nice because it gives one-floor living for some older folks or anybody else with a disability, and others in the family could live upstairs up the stairs.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I have one more question. I'm not sure if it's for you or for Molly,
Okay.
but when this was redesigned and reconfigured, does that change the placement of any of the stormwater infrastructure or trees? Because when we originally saw this project, there were more trees and there was more green space, and we sort of had to pare that down to fit in the stormwater. Has that increased the number of trees or changed the layout of the stormwater infrastructure?
Good question, and I'll bring Molly and Jen up to answer that question.
Good evening, Molly Titus from DePreet Engineering. So we maintained the underground systems beneath the parks on the bottom left corner and the top right. Those underground systems remained, so that the changes will be, we're going to add some localized dry wells to take some of these roofs now that we have some larger green spaces, which will distribute the water more evenly around the site. And Jen can come up to speak, but these trees, as shown as rendered, are based on her previous landscape plan and moving them, so they do take into account the drainage systems. Thank you.
Was there an increase in the amount of trees or other shrubbery that's being added to the site?
Generally speaking,
Just state your name
after
for the record,
Jen
Jen,
Judge,
please.
Gravely Hill Design Group. There has not been any decrease, and it will be a shift of a lot of trees. And as Paul had mentioned, the pocket park and greater, larger spaces, swaths. So I do anticipate additional trees. I don't have a number yet, but I think there's going to be more opportunity for several more. And once Molly works her magic, then we'll be able to, we look forward to hopefully presenting that.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's it.
Other comments, questions? Joe?
So, as I understand it, the question in front of us is whether we feel comfortable considering this as a minor change and therefore being reviewed by the administrative officer. And I would say I look at that from 3 different angles. The first one is it's a comprehensive permit. It's not necessarily allowed by right, but certainly a comprehensive permit is as close as you can. Whenever we have those type of applications in front of us, it's not a question of approval or disapproval. It's just, to me, it's a question of what are the impacts to the surrounding area and are we mitigating those? There's nothing that I see in this proposal that's going to change any impacts or have any more impacts to the neighboring. So from that angle, I'm very comfortable. The second angle that I would look at it from is the technical aspects, that being drainage, utilities, those types of things. There doesn't seem to be a lot of changes, but even the changes that I've made, we certainly have a competent engineering team that's proposing them, and we have a competent staff to review them. So from that angle also, I'm comfortable with it. And then the last one is the long-term impacts and sustainability. when this project first came in front of us, a lot of the concerns, at least concerns I expressed, was not what this project looks like when it is developed, but what does this project look like 20, 30 years down the line. Certainly, Champaign Heights and Fournier Estates is not necessarily the pride of South Kingstown as they exist now. And there was a lot of effort and conversations relative to building materials and those types of, and designs, so that we have something that is long-term sustainable. Some of that is the materials that go into the buildings, and it doesn't appear that any of that's changed, so that's certainly minor. And then the last piece was the kind of design. I think we want to make sure that we have a design where people feel a sense of ownership, even though they may not own it, but they have that pride and maintain the properties. Certainly increasing the number of units in a building decreases that to some extent, but this is kind of a good and bad in that reality is that we need to drive the cost down, otherwise we're not going to get this project. So with that said, I think that the designs of the building and adding the additional units is a very reasonable approach, and therefore I'm okay with that. So from all those different viewpoints, I'm okay considering this a minor.
Thanks, Joe. Other comments, questions from board members? Nothing? I guess we'll have you come forward with your wrap-up. I do want to say that considering all the obstacles you have encountered, you folks have done a very nice job. This is a significant and transformational project for the community and future residents. I think Mr. Callahan did a very nice job in summarizing the importance of this project. So if you folks want to wrap up whatever you might need to express at this point.
Sometimes it's better just to be quiet.
We don't often hear that, but go ahead, Susan.
I have a question that might be for you. Assuming that we are unanimous that this is a small change and we're good with that, does it make a difference as far as your application goes if it's changed administratively, or if you can say the whole board was, the board embraced the change? Like, does it matter politically how this goes down?
No, I think that based on the state law and the subdivision regulations, as long as the preliminary plan is approved with the modifications by the administrative officer pursuant to the regulations, that will be satisfactory, and that will help us with the speed of the efficiency of the application. Not that you weren't efficient prior, but just makes it a little easier for us in that respect to work with Mr. Rabbit as soon as possible.
Hopefully you'll maintain your excellent score and get some extra points for making these modifications. If there are no further comments or questions, we do have a motion before us that Jamie has provided. Joe?
I'll make that motion with maybe a slight change. I'll make that motion with a slight change. The planning board finds that the proposed revision to the development plan for Champaign Heights proposed by the South Kingstown Housing Authority are minor in nature and within the jurisdiction of the planning director and can be approved administratively. I also would add in, request that the admin officer provide the board a summary of changes he approves and periodic updates on status for planning board information only. This finding is based on the review of information supplied by the applicant and prepared by Union Studio Attorney Callahan.
We have a motion from Joe. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second from Susan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Motion carries unanimously. Thanks, folks. Good luck. Our next agenda item is at Old Tower Hill Road, form-based code, discussion on elements of the proposed form-based code. Jamie?
So, Madam Chair, if you just give me a moment, I'm going to put some slides
Sure.
up on the screen. So the planning board, at a couple of prior work sessions and in discussions with Pam Stacy King and Jason King, I think there were some questions and kind of understanding of what the form-based code, how we're getting there, how it's regulated, what the zones exactly mean, and how we relate to the transect zone. So I just wanted to take a couple of moments to kind of go through the 4 proposed transect zones, and also, based on the discussion, the potential of a 5th zone. And then I'd like to start with the form-based, the FB4, and then 3, then 2, then 1, and work a little bit backwards. And I think we potentially can eliminate or articulate some of the concerns and get to some understanding, so we can forward that to Jason King. I know Mr. King is going to do everything in his ability tonight to log in, not log in, but watch live. We spoke later this afternoon. And again, Jason, hopefully he's listening. He had a difficulty logging into the live stream, but again, we can send them links tomorrow. What you see on the screen tonight is just a simple kind of transparent overlay of the study area and the form-based code. Again, there are 4 transect districts proposed. There's a residential neighborhood, neighborhood center, neighborhood core, and gateway destination. These are names. So if someone doesn't, I know there was some discussion that, gateway destination doesn't sound like the right thing. It's maybe not a gateway, it's just another place within the corridor. We can change the names of the zones, but for all intents and purposes, there's an FB1, an FB2, an FB3, and FB4. Highlighting just the FB1, again, this is the residential neighborhood. Its intent is that the buildings are required to be street orientated, typically detached, although multifamily is allowed, and the intent of the zone is to add homes within walking distance to the old Tower Hill Road. The intent of the form-based code is to develop a new development pattern in this area of town to increase density in a walkable, livable, manageable scenario. I don't want to dwell on the items in the form-based one yet, but I think there was some concern and discussions about things above single-family homes. The one thing I want to point out, in this area, things above a single-family home are allowed now. Those things, such as duplexes, bed and breakfasts, have minimal regulatory control. There's no architectural standards. They're basically adhering to setbacks. One thing we can introduce in the FB1, and one of the primary things we're introducing, is new dimensional standards, but also architectural standards that this community doesn't have in those current areas now. Now, simply in the FB1, if people are concerned about triplexes, fourplexes, or country inns, you could modify that to be single-family homes, duplexes with standards, square footage, height, setbacks, orientation, number of bedrooms. All of that can be incorporated in the code to be more clear on what an intended outcome is, or what an anticipated outcome is. Right now, under duplexes, there's no bedroom count. There's no size restrictions. If you can fit it on the lot, you can drain it and you can park it, you can build it. So I think this code attempts to take a very vague regulation and create standards. Again, in the FB1, primarily single family, duplexes, there is the introduction of multifamily, which is triplex. I believe there's a discussion on fourplex, bed and breakfasts, and country inns, which is a larger version of a bed and breakfast. I don't want to dwell on the uses tonight, but again, those can be pared down. I would prefer they be pared down and clearly defined on a regulatory scale, scope, density, architectural form, versus just saying elimination. Because if you eliminate, you go back to the underlying zone, which is R10, R20. with no standards. The next, and again, this is just a highlight of where those zones are, and primarily there's 4 areas. There's one north of Main Street, south, well, really 3, but south of Main Street, which is bisected by the bike multipurpose trail in the 2 areas, and then east of 108, wrapping around in towards Narragansett and Route 1. The next zone is FB2, and that's the neighborhood center. These were the brown areas on your map. These are intended to facilitate, again, transition between that up-densitied residential area and the more commercialized area in purple. Those are associated with, with Main Street and kind of behind Belmont in the Cavadas area, buffering the FB1 and the southeastern portion of the zone. So again, there's 3 FB2 areas. There was a lot of discussion at one of our meetings about the FB2 on Main Street and the character of the existing, I don't want to call them housing type. There's been a longstanding conversion of single-family homes on Main Street in this area to service-orientated businesses, lawyers, doctors, psychologists, social work, architects, builders, interior designers, and some retail. So it's not necessarily a single-family neighborhood anymore, but it's holding the vernacular of a single-family neighborhood. The areas, again, behind in the Cavadas area, in the Belmont area, those are transitional zones to the FB1, which is a more densely clustered residential established neighborhood. And then to the south of that on Route 1 and 108, there's a portion that would be proposed to be FB2. And again, those are transitional zones to higher density. The next slide that I'm going to show you is the potential, instead of the elimination of FB2 on Main Street, would be to add an FB, and I just called it 1.5 right now, which is neighborhood edge. And the intent there would be to facilitate, again, a transitional area between a commercial development on Main Street, kind of south of Stedman's, into where the Purple Cow and areas are, and transitioning that, and then develop standards that respects the traditional style of residential architecture, and then if anything was ever a tear down rebuild, that it maintains that traditional residential feel. So you don't get square boxes, you get gables, you get Queen Anne looking style buildings, you get federal, you get a mix of what's there today, and you don't lose that architectural vernacular. So instead of just throwing out that FB2 area, address your concerns, address the things you are concerned about losing on that street, so that if there is redevelopment, that redevelopment occurs in a similar manner to the architectural vernacular that's there. Because again, it's kind of building driven, not necessarily use driven. So, yes, Caper.
I apologize for interrupting, but you talk about having a mix of those standards. Is there anything in the form-based code that pushes us towards a mix, or does it simply mean you can pick among those different styles?
So again, in the neighborhood edge, because the planning board was so concerned about retaining the architectural vernacular, I think it would drive you regulatorily to maintaining that vernacular. And not in essence, other than the telephone building, I don't think there's a flat roof. I shouldn't say that. There have been tear downs and rebuilds of historic residential homes where the vacuum store is, and a couple others that have single-story flat roofs. But again, the major architectural vernacular is larger single-family homes in the 3,000 to 4,000 square foot range in that area. So if someone were to redo the vacuum store, you wouldn't want them to do a 2-story box right? First floor retail office, second floor residential, maybe even third floor residential. You would want them to build a more residentially styled building. The uses could be office and retail on the first floor, residential second, and tucked into the gables on the third floor potentially. But it would retain the vernacular of the street and not necessarily just be a tear down and complete obliteration of what's there. So again, this is new, so we haven't developed standards for this area, but it would be in keeping. You had an application and a pre-app of the Neal Brothers coming in on a vacant lot where they were building a more residential style building, first floor office, second floor residential. So it would be more in keeping with that type of redevelopment. So hopefully that answers your question, Kate.
Yes and no. Part of the question was also wanting to maintain some variety, not wanting to have redevelopment where every residential-looking building also looked exactly like the adjacent residential.
Yeah, so you have the ability, there is a significant mix between Queen Anne, Federal, Victorian, traditional colonial within that streetscape. So you'd be able to, you're not picking one particular architectural style, such as Queen Anne, and saying every new building has to look like Keene architecture. You're going to pick vernacular within the street and allow the variation to that.
So but the form-based code would allow the variation, but it also wouldn't dictate the variation. So
It's going to set the guardrails.
So that if a developer, if multiple developers came in with the idea that they would create identical buildings.
No, we wouldn't. The form-based code would regulatorily steer you away from that. That would be on the wrong side of the guardrail. Okay. So again, this is something that was discussed. It's a potential solution to that Main Street corridor. Again, this is just going back. This is, again, the corridor looking at the FB3. And then this is a highlight of the FB3. The FB3, again, is the neighborhood core. Its primarily goals are to maximize the vibrancy of walkability, buildings that are close together, sidewalks, shade for pedestrians, parking lots screened from view. So this is where again, in Form FB1, you may be at 1 or 2 stories. In FB 1.5, you may be at 2 or 3 stories because that's what exists within the corridor. You're working within gables of a 3-story building. FB3 gets you at a higher standard, more dense standard. This is where you're primarily looking for that mixed use, first floor, office, retail, second, third, potentially fourth floor, residential, parking side or behind, all the buildings brought up to the street, initiation of public and private amenities as far as outdoor space, public and private spaces that make it that more walkable, inviting environment versus the car-centric environment that exists today. And again, going to FB4, which is primarily associated with the Wakefield Mall, and then 2 commercial properties to the southeast of the mall, in close proximity to the Route 1's on-ramp to Route 1. Again, this is it's called the gateway destination. Again, if you're not comfortable with that terminology, we can call it, the commercial core, we can come up with, and again, I think some of the issues are, when the consultant was looking at in initial discussions and during the charrette process, the terminology came out of gateway, that this, for visitors to the community, is the gateway into town. So that's where the terminology of gateway. People living in town don't necessarily view this as the gateway, but if you're a visitor or coming in from the outside or east, north, south, or east, this is the way you enter this commercial core in most instances. especially southbound on Route 1. So again, terminology can change, functionality is what's proposed right now. This is the most dense area that's being proposed for redevelopment. This would be the most dense building orientation, the most dense as it relates to building height and typology. And again, you see a representative building on the left. And again, Able City East has rendered this area also. So, you know, looking through FB1, FB2, FB3, FB4, the zone with the introduction of that neighborhood edge adds a fifth layer to that. Working backwards, FB4, I think everybody understood the density and height and setbacks associated with FB4, and at least initially we haven't heard a lot of pushback from what exists in being proposed in the code now. Is that a general statement? Other than name of gateway. But again, we're looking at it internally as a resident who's coming from Wakefield proper and don't see this area as a new gateway to this community. Again, feel free to, and then I'm going to work backwards again to FB3. Again, this is the central core. This is where we're allowing more dense uses. There are some things that aren't in the regulatory code now, such as drive-throughs and other commercial uses that exist on the corridor, but wouldn't necessarily be appropriate in the view of our consultant for the redevelopment of this area. Again, things that are very car-orientated. Any concerns about the FB3 uses? And again, we can dive into the setbacks and streetscape and everything there, but I just want to see if there's a comfort level with that. FB2, with the introduction of the neighborhood edge addressing Main Street, do any planning board members have any thoughts there?
I like your thoughts about what you want to do with protecting the general feel of that stretch of Main Street. I think this is a great, for me, I think it's a really good choice to do some extra protection on the appeal and the appearance and the history of that whole stretch of Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that improvement. And then jumping back to Gateway Destination, I think that's the metro stop at the airport.
Okay.
Like, it just feels like it's the airport stop on the train. I think we can get a cuter name.
Yeah, okay.
But one thing that it does, I think, is it takes into account the fact that as you come off of Route 1, this is where you enter the town. This is a key entry point to the town, and so it sets a tone. So to me, it just highlights that that's a very complicated area to address. In many respects, I think it's the most complicated area to address because it is one of it's the high-density commercial area. It's going to become a high-density part of town, and yet it is the place that people are going to come into as the entryway, so it is going to set the tone. So it's not a name that I think is attractive from a public viewpoint, but from a planning sense, I do think it makes sense. It is what I think they're trying to call our attention to is this is going to be an entry place, and it's going to set the tone for the town, and we want to be careful as we think about the uses that we want, the density that we want, and the tone that we want to set, both for the residents and for people coming in from the outside. And I think the name, as a working name, does capture that.
I agree with what Susan and Caper said. Obviously, this project was initiated with the idea of creating opportunity and transforming the area that is zoned commercial highway. I think Jamie's suggestion about the FB 1.5 is a good one, and we should look at that at a greater level of detail. I still have concerns about the FB1 area. As everyone knows, there has been great interest in the community recently with some of the developments in that area. And because that wasn't a part of the original plan per se, I think that there is a need to convince both the planning board and the members of the community who are in that area that they're not going to end up with tear downs. And it's not the architecture, it's the mass and the scale. It's the size and the scale that is so different from what currently exists. And in order to move this project forward, I think we need to strongly consider eliminating those areas. Maybe that's something we can come back to in the future, but right now, yeah, I don't feel that we should be setting them up, despite the fact that they don't have architectural standards now, for potential for fourplexes and things that are just out of scale. That's my opinion. I'd like to hear from everybody else on that.
So Jamie, can you remind me, where's 1.5?
Main Street.
Well, that's 2.
Yeah, the FB2, which is orange, would
Oh, I see.
transition to the
Changing it to
FB1.
Okay,
1.5,
got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Am I up?
I had a brief discussion with Jason and Pam regarding the totality of the area and what the council's trying to accomplish. And I think we can put information forward on the FB1 and how the integration of FB1 into the overall concept for the form-based code may be able to be viewed as a positive. And I think one of the things is if you kept it to single family with duplex, which is allowed under the regulations now, and added the structural elements to form, density, and style, it gives you more regulatory, I don't want to use the term control, but for the discussion purposes today, control over an area that you have little to no control over today as it relates to the development that people have reacted to, specifically on Oak Street. If you just simply remove FB1, you lose an opportunity to develop standards to steer development in a manner in which you feel is appropriate for the community. And it is a transitional zone to a higher density in FB2 and as a buffer to FB3. So again, there's a layering of the cake. There's, it's low, higher, and then high, and then higher. Again, I'd like to give the opportunity to Jason and Pam and to the council to understand the dynamics of the 4 zones. I think I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads on the 1.5 on the neighborhood edge, that I don't think there's any resistance to potentially adding this 5th component to the plan where would have FB1 through FB5. We would just potentially renumber them, or we could just keep the FB 1.5 because it's really in between the two. And I'll seek guidance from Jason and Pam at Able City East. But again, in my discussions with Pam and Jason, they're trying to hold the redevelopment of the neighborhood in a walkable, more densely developed area.
And I don't think
where
that people...
standards don't exist today.
I think we all understand that. We would love to see architectural standards, but when you start talking about more density in those areas, you're not going to get community support right now. I mean, I'm just trying to be realistic.
But more
And-
density is allowed today with no standards. So I think that needs to be articulated.
Nevertheless, there needs to be a better means to demonstrate best and worst case scenarios of what could happen in that area, and the same kind of sort of visual preference survey that Jason and Pam did for essentially the commercial areas. You'd have to do that for those residential areas, and I, again, it's up to them to convince this board and the public of how appropriate that would be in those areas.
So Joe. I'm all in favor of increased architectural standards in that neighborhood, because we've just been burned by having no architectural standards. But if we are not increasing the density, we need to stop saying that, because that makes us look like we are proposing more dense things like the recent development that happened. If we need to acknowledge that the regulations already allow density, then we could acknowledge that. But if we use the words increased density, it looks like we are proposing jamming in a bunch of college student duplexes in that neighborhood. But also, I didn't understand, and I'm saying it again, why we were reducing setbacks in that neighborhood, and why I can build my big old house closer to my backyard neighbor, and how that is going to further what we're trying to propose to happen down here. I can just have a bigger house closer to the neighbors, and that's not increasing your density, improving your density, I think, serving anything else. It's just making potentially larger houses closer to the neighbors. And I don't know how that's promoting what we're trying to accomplish in that neighborhood. Like, I don't know why we're reducing all those setbacks. That I can see there's going to be a whole lot of pushback when we reduce the setbacks to all the neighborhoods and the lots in that
So
neighborhood.
again, I'll defer that to our consulting team to work on how to answer that and articulate that through design.
So I know I'm a broken record. This is literally the 5th time I've asked why all the setbacks are being reduced. And everyone just gives me a blank stare. Like, I asked Jason, I asked, oh my God, what's his wife's name? I've mentioned it here, I've talked to you, like, why are all the setbacks smaller?
The intent is to allow more area within the lot to be potentially developed. I think what you're articulating is your fear that if you reduce the setbacks, that someone's just going to build a larger single-family house within their new buildable area. And again, I'll defer that to Pam and Stacy to work on showing how that could or could not be accomplished, and if it is still a fear, how you can rework a regulation to alleviate that concern.
And Jamie, just to add to what Susan was saying about the setbacks, when you reduce the setbacks, you're essentially going to decrease green space. And, you know, in this era that we are dealing with climate impacts, the green space is more than just aesthetics. It's environmental, it's health, it's everyday well-being, it's sense of place. I don't think that's where we want to be doing this.
So we just had a project a couple of years ago here where the setback from the wetland was 10 feet, and they built that house right on the line, and the setback from the street was 20 feet, and they built that house right on the line. I think that you are potentially opening us up to just bigger duplexes filling up lots.
So again, the consultant has been tasked by the council to show a plan that increases density in this area.
Not in this particular area originally,
The
Jamie.
neighborhood study plan includes a much larger area than just the frontage along 108 and Main Street and Old Tower Hill Road. The study area is larger. It was specific to that realm so that it wouldn't just be a redevelopment of a commercial strip. It would be the redevelopment and a transition of a neighborhood. You're trying to, let's throw out form-based code and just re-adopt the zoning code for the Wakefield Mall and make it a cute new redevelopment faux Disney World. That wasn't what the consulting team was tasked with. Again, give our team an opportunity. The primary aspect that I'm trying to get at, and I think this is a good discussion this evening, is what are your concerns with the code? What do you feel the concerns, based on a planning board representative of the community, are the concerns, and then give the consulting team the opportunity to address them. So.
I think we've created a list this evening,
No,
which
no.
you already
And again,
were.
this
I
is,
mean,
this-
I know
that's
you
why I say this is
understand where we're
this is a
coming from.
good and necessary discussion.
I actually have a follow-up question. Jamie, I may have misunderstood, but I thought you were saying at one point that it wasn't actually increasing the density, that there's, under current zoning, some of this density is already allowed. That's one point that I heard, I thought. And Susan, as you were expressing your concerns, you seem to be emphasizing what you think the community would be adverse to would be having residential development of larger houses that are expanding into the increased that reduced setbacks are enabling them to put their houses closer to the development. Since we're really talking about mixed use, I mean, can't we control that by coming up with a form-based code that ties the changes in setbacks to mixed use, so that it can't be simply a residential enlargement, it would have to be some sort of commercial use as well?
I think what Caper's pointing, and again, I can have this discussion with our consulting team. The intent is to potentially allow increased density, or we'll call it unit yield, right? Not just bigger residential buildings. So I think it's more of a fear, less of a concern, but we can approach how to alleviate that concern through regulations. So I understand if you're, we usually say if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, and given all the setbacks, the maximum area you can build on, we'll just say is 5,000 square feet. Susan's concern is you reduce the setback, someone's just going to build on 8,000 square feet, a bigger single-family home. That's not the intent of what the code's striving for. We're striving for the reductions allows an additional unit to be built where you have increased density on the unit count, not just a much larger single-family home. So again, I think we can address that, and that's a transition to the other more dense areas.
We could also do it in terms of unit count, but also in terms of mixed use, if we wanted to move to mixed use, to make a transition between areas. I mean, I think what we need to be focusing on is what do we want to invite these neighborhoods to become? And then the second point was, Maria, one of the things I took away from Maria's many comments was that it's a matter of perception from the town, and that it's not so much the problem with the form-based codes necessarily, it's how that is being perceived by the general public, and maybe we're simply not doing enough to educate them as to what the project is all about, and what we're trying to accomplish, and what are the reasons that are driving that need. All of which can be worked through, I think, but you need to do it simultaneously. It's not just about advancing the changes to the zoning or the regulation. It's about how do you present that to the community? How do you get the community involved? How do you get them accepting it? Or how do you get them articulating their problems with it so that you can surface those issues before you have decisions being made? And one of the problems we're running into now is there's development going on already, and I think that's creating frustration both on the sides of the planning department, the planning board, and also the community, because they're seeing things go up in ways that they don't understand and don't necessarily like.
That's a good point. And you know, there's always going to be folks who will try to create opportunities on certain parcels of land that they may own or purchase. And did want to clarify that the FB1 area that we're talking about does not involve mixed use, just so that you're clear on that. Joe?
So I like the architectural guidelines and guardrails for the FB 1.5. I think that area provides a block between Old Wakefield and the newer Wakefield. Otherwise, it would just kind of be one sprawl between the two. So keeping it as, looking as a residential, I'm definitely in favor of. I'm also in favor of allowing larger buildings in that area. I think you're always going to have diversity because the lots in that area are pretty diverse. You have lots that are 6,000 square feet, and I think you get some lots that are probably close to an acre. I think you're always going to have diversity in the buildings because the lots are so diverse. I'm also in support of the higher densities in the FB1. To allow more units with proper controls of make sure we give consideration to parking lots being either hidden behind buildings, proper vegetation around them. And I think maybe we should think about controlling, if we have more units, how many bedrooms there are. So the building doesn't necessarily get a lot larger, but if we limited some, you know, two bedrooms per unit, but then increase the number of units, allow the increased number of units. So I'd be in support of all that.
No, if I may, Madam Chair, it's interesting that Joe brings that point out. Amy Gomes and I have had a couple of conversations regarding the discussion about duplexes and what the concerns are with regards to primarily scale, location, orientation on the lot. And some of the things we've discussed is bedroom count, size of a duplex. You know, again, everyone's thinking, well, a duplex is basically a single-family house that's cut down the middle, and one person lives on one side, one person lives on the other, and then someone says, no, I want 3,000 square foot homes put together, and all of a sudden you have a 6,000 square foot home, and everyone's scratching their head going, well, that's not what I envisioned as a duplex. So again, the point's well taken, both with what everyone said tonight. Let us put our brains together, let us look at the issues. I think one point that became clear to us through the process is in the FB1 that things above a duplex, which are duplexes are currently allowed in the zone, but a triplex or fourplex or maybe a country inn are pushing the envelope with regards to density that's less traditional, that's within the zone. So we'll try and focus on single family and duplex and the appropriate scale and setting of those. I know Able City East may say, well, if I can fit a duplex at, we'll say 1,600 square feet aside, couldn't I do a triplex if I reduce the square footage to maybe 1,000 square feet a unit? So it's a similar sized building, it just has 3 units versus 2. So again, we have a really good, competent team on our side. Let's see what we can come up with. And one thing I did bring, if you can't see it that well here, but in the bottom left-hand corner is Keene Architecture. It's the Queen Anne building on Main Street. If you went to that building in similar size and scale, exists in Providence, East Providence, Pawtucket, Woonsocket, but in those communities you may see 7 units in that building. But if you drove by, other than counting the electric meters on the side,
Sorry,
don't
not
see
not a
that.
helpful analogy for us.
No, but I'm just saying, we're not proponents in the FB1 of 7 units, but I'm saying you can do 2 units appropriately scaled with guardrails and design standards in an area that has none of that with regards to regulatory control, other than setbacks and height.
If I want to be on mic. If buildings like that were being proposed, we might be having a completely different discussion. But that's not what we're seeing.
Because you have no standards right now. What the form-based code is can develop the guidelines for what's appropriate in that area and at what scale and what architectural vernacular. Again, there's a discussion, do you want to make it look like Disney World? The intent is not to make it look like Disney World. The intent is to make it look like it was built 100 years ago in South Kingstown with modern building techniques. And again, you've heard me use the term modern interpretation of a historic vernacular. We have a few of those buildings in town that take the shape and form of historic buildings. They just look a little more modern. And I'm not saying modern farmhouse, white clapboards with black windows either. But again, there are good designers out there. But not every builder uses a good designer. But if you have the regulations that require them to design to a certain standard, they're going to have to adhere to that standard or not be able to build within that area at the density they're proposing. They'll be stuck at single family. Again, with regards to single family, we are not proposing any standards on an architectural standpoint for single family homes. It's only when you get beyond single family. So I don't want to ever tell someone that a stucco or a villa or a Tudor or a colonial is not appropriate.
So we have had some projects in recent history that have been appropriate infill. High Street is an example of that. But there's a difference between appropriate infill that fits in, that works, and we're just going to increase the density in this overall area as a whole. So, and that's what the public's.
And I would agree with you, Maria. I
concerns
think
with
that's
it,
what the
yeah.
concern is that
Exactly.
every single-family house is going to be torn down, and then it's going to look like the duplexes that were built. And that's the non-intent of the regulation. That could occur if you do nothing. But if you look at this as an opportunity to look at areas that are around the commercial districts as those transect zones, and what are you comfortable with on setting the guardrails? Understanding that single-family neighborhood may transition to slightly more dense in the form of duplexes, or, I'm sure Jason and Pam may say, let me try and show you a really well-done triplex, adhering to some of those standards, so when you drive by down the street, it feels very South Kingstown appropriate and not just a replacement of density in a more urban setting.
Joe?
So one other thing to consider, Jamie, that area of FB 1.5 is a break, not just because of the architectural style, but also traffic and the number of cars. So something to take in consideration, because if it's commercial downtown and we're only requiring a 50%, or we allow a 50% reduction, I'm a supporter of the larger buildings, I'm a supporter of the higher density, but we also need to make sure that we don't crowd the streets with cars in that area, because then you will no longer have that break between Old Wakefield and New Wakefield. So just something to take into consideration as far as the parking requirements as we increase the size of the building, so the number of units.
Good point. Anything else from anyone at this point? 5-minute break, everyone?
I hope this was helpful for everybody.
Oh, definitely.
Maria, just before we break,
Sure.
I was poking around and I just wanted to point out a couple of things. The FB1 areas to the west of Route 138, those are all RM and R10 zones We allow everything up through multi-household land development in those zones. So there's a lot of density already provided for in those zones under our existing code. The area, the FB1 area to the east that abuts up against Route 1, that's R20, allows for duplexes by right, just the way you got on Oak Street, and there are quite a few half-acre lots in that area that can become exactly what happened on Oak Street right now. And that happened because he created a 30,000 square foot lot, cut it in half, and built 2 duplexes. So what happened on Oak Street is primed to occur there right now with, as Jamie says, no standards to prevent something different from happening. This may actually be a way to help address what happened on Oak Street.
Thank you, those are good points. All right, we'll be back in 5 minutes. Let's continue on, folks. Planning board liaison activities, anybody?
So Brian, you can help me out a little bit. So Brian, you can help me out a little bit, but there was a meeting I did attend. The thing that I took out away from it was that they really do want to help out and work with the planning board for the missing middle, for the zoning that was proposed by the consultant. They're a little frustrated that it hasn't gone any further. I think that where they left off was that they were going to write a letter to this board and to the town council asking how can they help and how can they push it forward. And there was frustration that if they don't get anywhere, maybe they'll just submit it as like a private citizen would, which would start a clock on a mandatory review by the town. But I don't know, Brian. That was, obviously they're just this frustrated. It's a board of people like us that want to do their best, and they're trying, and they want to help out, and they want to work with this board to push that missing middle along.
I think the other thing they also talked about was writing a letter in support of the form-based code. Whether or not it is the code as it currently exists today, or just the concept of re-envisioning this area using a form-based code. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the draft letter yet.
The Scenic Stewardship Road Committee is awaiting a meeting date to finalize the project. I don't think we have a date yet, right, Jamie? Okay. That's all I have. Update from staff?
We have SNEPA coming up in November. If anyone is seriously interested in going, please let me know. We may have some resources available. It's mid-year. I wish it came at the end of the year, but we may not be able to pay for all of you to go or subsidize all of you, but we may be able to give some financial assistance. So that's in Newport on November, I want to say 8th and 9th. It's a Thursday and Friday.
Wait.
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear what is.
Southern New England
6 and 7.
Planning
It's- yeah, the 6th
Association.
and
So
7th.
it's Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts who have an annual conference that rotates between those three states. It was in Springfield last year, Newport this year, and the prior year it was in New Haven. Right?
It's almost always in the garden spots in New Haven or Hartford, but they have it in Connecticut and Springfield and Worcester in Massachusetts, so.
And again, given the size, I think Newport may be limited to 400
Yes.
attendees,
That's what
so,
I've heard. I'm definitely interested.
okay. We'll send a notice.
Okay.
We don't have it yet, but when it's available, we'll send a notice out.
Okay.
Or if someone's interested, I want to say $250 to $300 for attendance is typically the norm. So, for 2 days.
You buy 1 day pass?
You can buy a one-day pass. And again, we can look at whether, depending on how many people are interested, what level of subsidy we can provide.
And is there an agenda so you can choose
Oh, yeah, you can always choose what sessions to go to.
if there's an agenda? If there's like a.
There will be once
It's
the,
not out
the agenda may not be available when registration comes out. That's usually a work in progress.
Planners, always running behind.
They may not have a deadline yet, so they haven't missed it.
And then I'll also make the plug, the following Saturday.
Right.
The following Saturday, which is the
15th?
15th of November, that's the Rhode Island Land Use Officials Training. That's a Saturday morning, that's the one at the Inn at the Crossing. That's where Judge Lanfair will be speaking. And then there'll be breakout sessions, and the planning board breakout sessions will include the stuff for your sea level rise training.
What Saturday is that? What's the date?
It's the 15th of November.
And how do we sign up for that?
It'll be coming out about October 15th. There'll be if you've gone to any of their training previously, and it'll come to Jamie and he'll send it out to you to register.
And since there were questions while we were at break, Lofts at Fairgrounds is doing their public presentation, Q&A, tomorrow night at Schneider Electric. It's in the parking lot. They're putting up a tent. And it was described to me as a brief presentation and then lots of time for questions and answers.
How's the word getting out to the community?
Yeah.
I have no idea. This is something that the applicant ran
Yeah.
with, so.
Define community, I believe they sent letters out to people at least within 200 feet or the direct neighborhood, or out to 138.
And what time is it?
6 o'clock.
They didn't do any
So-
public notice, it was in essence invitation.
And so, Jamie, just to backtrack, they came before us only for pre-application, correct?
They came under pre-app, they have submitted for master plan.
But we have not yet seen that.
You have not seen that. TRC tomorrow.
And is that master plan something they're going to presumably have available for the public tomorrow night at this meeting, or is it more general than that? Do you have any idea?
They did not share with us what their presentation materials are, but if anyone's interested, the TRC agenda is posted on the town's webpage under agendas and meeting minutes for the technical review committee, and their submissions for tomorrow's TRC meeting are on that webpage.
Okay.
And 327 units in 6 buildings.
Okay.
They certainly applaud their attempt to get community feedback before they develop the plan, comes in front of the planning board.
Sure.
Just a little concerned whether it was widespread enough that the community that is going, because the mandatory area is pretty limited just because of where they're located, just other industrial buildings, right?
Right, so
Right.
using the notice, yeah, the
I mean,
200-foot notice may not amount to,
It would have been nicer if they kind of maybe worked. with
Remember, they're not
staff.
required to do anything at this point in time.
I realize
True,
that, but unless they do, the more they do ahead of time, the easier it goes to get through this board. When the neighbors come and tell us, yeah, we already talked to them and we like what they have, it's certainly a lot easier on us to do the right thing for the town.
Jamie, is there anything else from your end?
Just an update from last night's council meeting. I know the cottage, community cottage court was referred from the council to the planning board. Planning board made a recommendation to the council to adopt it with no sunset provisions. The council did not act on the ordinance change last night and tabled it to their next regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay. And speaking of the council, it seems as though with all of the new legislation and consequent regulation changes that will be upon us, the interest from folks in the community, the issues with capacity. I know Joe has asked in the past for an analysis with regard to wastewater systems. And we are constantly talking about impacts of traffic, which, you know, we have a circulation element within our comprehensive plan that we rarely discuss, balancing the community interests. it seems as though this would be a good time for us to ask for a joint work session with the council to discuss some of these things. It would be, in my opinion, preferable that would be a standalone meeting, not trying to fit it in 20 minutes before the regular meeting. I don't know how other people feel.
I certainly would still like to have that briefing from Public Works on where there's capacity. Not necessarily, not that that would be a approval or disapproval reason
Right,
for the
right.
comprehensive permit, but it may change what we ask for in the design, just making sure that other houses in the area don't get stuck with not being able to hook up, or a very expensive hookup in the future.
And, you know, issues with water. I mean, we still have, yeah.
And then this
Water ban,
this project
yeah.
aside, it's good to know where we have extra capacity, so we can think about that when we think about increased density and where
Yep.
we're limited, so we can think about that as we're considering increasing increased density.
Absolutely. I mean, water quantity and quality. We have a groundwater protection overlay district. That needs to be part of the conversation, and finding that balance.
It doesn't have to be really technical, Jamie, just kind of, Rich could get us, this is where you have more capacity, we're about 75% here, we're about 30% here, we're nearing capacity there. That
Nice little
level.
map. Yeah, that would be helpful. And also, in that regard, something related to traffic. You know, I know that different traffic issues have come up before the council recently, and so that would be helpful to have any kind of information that would help us as we move forward through all of this. But do folks agree that we would like to have a work session, standalone work session with the council?
Yeah, I'm certainly good with it. I kind of like the idea of this meeting. But Maria brings up a good point. I mean, the background information that we could get from Public Works is probably something that we should have. So it's just to understand where you guys consider there be traffic problems would be nice to know. I mean, we have a project now that's in front of us of whether we're going to consider the road and not the road. And, you know, it's good to know what the town staff understands of those areas and where they think they have issues.
I'm not sure if it's in final form yet, but there is a Safe Streets for All report that was being undertaken by the state. I know we reviewed some drafts of that. I'll have to check the status of that, but that deals with some capacity issues as well as safety issues of intersections and where accidents and trouble spots are. But I'll check the status of
Isn't
that.
there something, I just recently saw something online.
Me too.
It may have been released,
That-
I'm just,
That South Kingstown had done some kind of
okay.
a study.
It showed like 5 hotspots, right?
So if you could send us that link, that would be helpful as well.
I'll look for
You
that.
know, the more information we have going forward, the better.
The only thing I would say, and I can work with the town manager's office on the ability to have a joint meeting. You're, in all likelihood, going to need 1 or 2 joint meetings with the council and the consultant on form-based code.
Okay.
So I don't want to steer you away from meeting with them on other issues, but I think your time is probably most importantly spent on the form-based code initiative on the redevelopment opportunity of the Old Tower Hill Road area. But I'll have those discussions with the town manager's office.
Okay. Sounds good. Andy? Update on legal issues. And you're going to talk about the Lampier decision as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm essentially going to talk about the Landfair decision. The legal issues, you've gotten the memo we've talked about the changes and so forth in that. And so that's We're going to be working on the changes to the local ordinances and the regs. There's not the same sense of urgency with them because their state law doesn't matter what our local regs say. We have to follow the state law, and some of them took effect back on June 27th. So, yes, we need to fix our regs so they match, but we got to do that with, so does everybody else. So, we're moving forward on that. I'm sure there'll be a new set of bills introduced next February also. There'll be more. There'll probably be another year's worth of land use bills coming. But the other question was this case that came out 2 weeks ago regarding Westerly. And as I started to say, I guess, the original plan, the real goal, I think, of these developers was wanting a hotel and a resort, a golf court resort community, including housing around it. And at least originally, Jamie thinks that it was the housing project was absolutely real and possible. I think, at least originally, I don't think it started that way. I think it just started, okay, you won't give us what you want. We'll try to jam in as much as we can. The decision itself, I don't think is surprising in one sense, in that Judge Lanphier tends to give a great deal of discretion to the local boards. And, you know, some of the argument that the time period had been missed by the developer was kind of ridiculous when they had agreed to waive it to a particular time. So, as to the basic question too, the other thing is, don't forget, this was based on the old law. They filed in December 2023. So technically, this was a hearing on their master plan. And it was also at the time where there were two sets of standards, one for approval, one for denial. So I don't know how much you can read into this for going forward. As to, I don't really see that much tea leaves other than the fact this, together with the Narragansett decision by Judge Lanphier last summer or wherever it was, where there was a denial there because the applicants refused to provide any information about the water and sewer. They were saying, you know, this is master plan, that's later, we don't have to do it. And Lanphier basically said, well, no, you don't have to do everything, but there's some minimum you have to provide to prove that there's some feasibility of going forward. And that was part of his denial of that case. Again, that also was a case that was master planned before the law changed. But he said that. So I think there is some deference to the planning board on those issues, on the infrastructure issues. That was also similar to a case, I think it was Johnston, about the water line. And again, they couldn't extend, it was going to cost a fortune to extend the water line. It's like, well, you can't do it. Well, that's not the town's problem. That's your problem. If you can't extend the water line, you can't develop it there. That's a reason for denial. So I guess that's the only kind of trend I see in this is, infrastructure is still a limitation on their building. It'll be interesting to see with the new law with the, one set of standards now, synchronous instead of asynchronous set of standards, and also with the state removing more of the environmental concerns from the jurisdiction of the planning board. Really making clear that that's DEM and CRMC decisions. So if anything, really about the only thing that is left to you is the pure infrastructure issues of that. If you've got, in a way, you've got more control if you've got sewer, because then you might not have the capacity. If it's an ISDS system or a community septic system, then it's in the hands of DEM. So, that's my conclusions.
Thanks, Andy.
I'm happy to take any other questions. I won't say answer, but I'm happy to take any other questions.
And Jamie just sent around the copy of the decision, so everybody should read through that. Very interesting.
The information from Public Works on this other project even more important.
Absolutely, and, yeah.
Falls exactly into that.
As I've said before, most of the communities on the Cape, if not all, did an analysis of their infrastructure before any of the housing bills were passed in Massachusetts. Cape Cod Commission. If there is nothing else from Jamie, I just want to have folks look at, Jamie or Lynn passed out a meeting schedule.
Yeah, Lynn just wanted to
Yes, I think
hand
this
this out kind of as a reminder that because of holidays and other conflicts, we're moving a few meetings to Thursday. So, I mean, sometimes we're so used to programmed for Tuesday nights, just as a reminder in October and November, we're
What's the
moving.
what's the November? Oh, Veterans Day, right?
I believe so.
But everybody should look at the regular meeting, which is on the 25th. And
When's Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving would be,
27th?
I'm just looking that up, Thanksgiving is the 27th, and our meeting is the 25th. So people, check your calendars, and please advise staff if you are unavailable.
Yeah, I printed a bunch.
Just, that's, not the best timing that particular week. If there's nothing else, motion to adjourn.
Oh, no.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.